Mm. Mm. Gotta stay at the right angle. Alright, so my lord. What do you want me to talk about today? What do I want to talk about? I don't know, I was just... I'm a little jacked up on caffeine right now, so that's why I'm a little, like, antsy. Well, I got up around 6. But then I don't think I got out of bed until 8. I've been drinking my coffee. I've been downing my coffee. Oh. I've been downing my coffee lately, like it's doing 2 cups a day instead of 1. It's kind of a lot. No, I didn't even start drinking coffee until, how was I? Right after my 40th birthday. After I turned 40, that was when I started drinking coffee. So I've only been drinking coffee for about 4.5 years now. Because it was when I went to Dallas with Bernardo. Remember? Well, obviously you remember. I don't know why I said that. I never used to drink it. I didn't like it. And the first time I had coffee, I was 15, and it just didn't sit well. I don't understand why the fuck anybody drank that shit. It tastes like shit. I was already, I got too much energy to be drinking coffee. I drink coffee, when I used to drink coffee, like, if I just took a sip of that stuff, when fucking time would stop around me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, but then, when we were driving cross country. We were driving from New Jersey to Texas, to Laredo, and I remember the first morning, we got there in like 40 hours, but the first morning I woke up in the passenger seat, and we had pulled into an IHOP in Tennessee. And when we went to go eat, I saw my friend and his father-in-law. They were drinking coffee. I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's just see what'll happen. And I think I drank 2. Because up until that point, I didn't touch the stuff. Back when I was married, my wife used to drink coffee all day. And then if we went to her parents' house for like dinner or something, it's Staten Island Italian, so they were fucking drinking coffee to wash down their dinner. I don't smell no coffee. Which, again, never made sense to me. Why the fuck are you drinking coffee at night? And for 12 fucking years, 12 years I was with that family. And every time at dinner, Derek, do you want coffee? I don't touch this stuff. I don't touch this stuff. I think it just became a joke at one point. That and the white spongy cheese. But it wasn't until I got back from Dallas, which was, well, after Laredo, I was driving them to the border in Laredo, and then I stayed. And then I hung out in Laredo by myself for a couple days before taking a Greyhound up to Dallas. And then I stayed in Dallas for a week. Before I came home. But once I got home around, I'd say November 20th. Because I went from Laredo, I took the bus from Laredo to Dallas on the 11th of November. Intentionally. Because it was 11/11. I remember this perfectly. Like, we got to the hotel in Laredo. It was the third quarter moon in Leo. So it was Scorpio season. It was a Sunday, if I remember correctly. And then following the third quarter moon in Leo was the new moon in Scorpio. And that new moon in Scorpio, that's when I was in Dallas. That was a fun night. Yeah, because we got there on Sunday, on the third quarter moon. And then the 11th of November was on a Wednesday. So I was in Dallas from Wednesday to Wednesday. The video of my time in Laredo, on some of my time in Laredo, is on here. But you have to scroll back to 2020. Then when I got back, that's when I did a treat yourself weekend. I bought myself a whole bunch of clothes. It was a reward for making it back in one piece. So when I was in Dallas, I almost died a couple times. Because I put myself in these situations where I could have gotten killed. And one time I almost did get killed. I was about to get my ass whooped by two dudes. I was scared as fuck. That was the night before I left. I was debating whether or not I was going to stay in Dallas for another week, but then that last night, I accidentally pushed these two dudes to the fucking brink. I was traumatized. That was incredibly traumatizing. But then when I got back, that's when I signed up for Aaron Doughty's 21-day Raise Your Vibration Challenge. Which wasn't not fun. I met a lot of cool people doing it, and it definitely had a profound effect on me because I stuck with it for the 21 days. But on the 20th day, I made a lady friend, Sophie, who I was madly in love with. And Sophie and I, we ended up doing I don't want to say we did a show, but part of the 21-day challenge was to get yourself to break out of your own boundaries. So what I had suggested to her was, why don't we do a live together for the group? I wanted to see what happens. And it was fucking awesome. I think we ended up talking for like 2 hours in the Facebook group chat, in the Facebook group. And during our talk, I was bringing up some alchemical equations that I had been familiarized with over the years leading up to that point. And I was so unhappy with the way that I explained it, that I was explaining it to her, that after we had signed off, I had this idea. The following morning was the new moon in Sagittarius. I remember that. This was only this was right before the Great Conjunction in 2020. On the winter solstice, Jupiter and Saturn came into a 0-degree conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius. But that week prior, that following morning, after Sophie and I did that live, I went for a walk, and I had this idea of how to actualize the alchemical equation that I had been trying to explain. So I learned this from a book, the Tarot of the Bohemians, written by Pappas, which was published around 1888, 1889. And it was a demonstration of what he referred to as theosophical addition. I gotta remember to bring that up. So the way theosophical addition works is you take any number and then you add up all of the preceding numbers with that number and then reduce them. Like numerological reduction. So for instance, the number 4, because that's important. 4, 7, and 10. 1, 4, 7, 10. All of them equal 1. So 1 equals 1, 4 equals 1, 7 equals 1, and 10 equals 1. So you take the number 4, for instance. And then to perform the theosophical addition, you add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, which equals 10. And then you reduce 10, 1 plus 0, and you get 1. And then the same thing with 7, for instance. You add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7, which gives you 28. 2 plus 8 equals 10. 1 plus 0 equals 1. So the logic behind that is, when you take the first 10 numbers, well, technically the first 10 numbers, you break it down into three categories of 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 4 is the last number of the first sequence, but it's also it's the last number of the first sequence and the first number of the second sequence, which ends with 7. So 7 is the last number of the second sequence, but it's also the first number of the third sequence, 7 through 10. And then when we get to 10, that kind of like recycles. That recycles things. So 10 reduces down to 1. 10 comes after 9, reduces down to 1, but you're 1 octave higher than before. So instead of starting back at 1, we start at 11. So 11, 22, 33, 44, then 44, 55, 66, 77, 77, 77, 88, 99, 110. Right? Or, yeah. But then we triple up the numbers. Then we start back at 111, 222, 333, 444, then 444, 555, 666, 777, then 777, 888, 999, 1110. The idea that Pappas was trying to demonstrate was the alchemical process that's encoded within the tarot. Now, granted, that theosophical addition, that's more. It was an introductory concept. This way to kind of like break the individual. Is it raining? The idea is to get the reader, the student, out of their limited understanding of math, of numbers, and to introduce a more abstract way of perceiving the first 10 numbers of the numeric string. So the numbers 1 through 4 kind of represent that first phase in the process. Refinement. Alchemical refinement. So the first phase, 1 through 4, is like that introductory initiation. Then 4 through 7 would be the second round of refinement. And then that third round, 7 through 10, that's the third and final phase of the refinement. But in completing all 3 phases, that embodies the fourth and final phase of refinement, which is why we start back at 11, at 1-1. And then begin the process over again, like 1-1, 2-2, 3-3, 4-4. We're not necessarily looking at the numbers as integers as much as symbolic values. It's what they represent, you know? So the idea that came to me was more along the lines of the principles of what that refinement process represented. So the live that Sophie and I did, it was on the 20th day of 21 days of the 21-day challenge. So on the 21st day is when I woke up, took that walk, and I had this idea, like, you know what? Why don't I do this again? Right? Because technically, the 21-day challenge, it's a 3-week process, which aligns with the 3 levels of refinement that are encapsulated within this theosophical model. So hypothetically speaking, if I go through this process, if I go through the 21-day challenge a second time, I already know what's coming, but it'll also give me an opportunity to further refine those qualities, those attributes within myself that we just spent the last 3 weeks working on, right? But I took it a step further, and right off the bat, like the plan shifted drastically, because while I was on the walk, I went, well, you know, each round of the 21 days is 3 weeks, 3 rounds of refinement. So what if we do it 3 times? So what ended up happening was, and this was it was perfect how this all worked out too. So I started the first day of my second round of the 21-day challenge, the day following the 21st day of my first round. From there, what I was doing, just to kind of, again, like I was saying, one of the primary principles behind the 21-day challenge was to step out of your comfort zone and to kind of put yourself out there. So what I started doing was I started doing live videos for the group every single day. I think the first challenge, the first day's challenge is to either take a picture of yourself or like do a recording for the group. And so that's what I would do every single day. For 21 days, I said, fuck it, let me just bang this out. Because of how uncomfortable this is. And so for those first 20 days of my second round of the 21-day challenge, that's what I was doing every single day. And it worked out lovely. I had a great time. And it was really uncomfortable, but it got me to break out of a lot of my... it forced me to face a lot of my own inner demons by having to talk like that, to talk in front of the camera like that live. That was the difference. It wasn't like this where I'm just fucking recording myself talking for 2 hours. Instead, I had a live camera with me talking for 2 hours. I think the longest one I did was 4 hours long. It was 4 hours long. I actually hit the limit in the group live. Like as soon as you hit the 4 hour mark, it automatically turns you off. But it was more that was more like an endurance thing. I wanted to see how long I could pull it off for. And I think it was around day 17 or 18 where Aaron Doty came onto the group and told everybody, due to the popularity, we're gonna do one more live round, and I'm gonna do it with you guys. So originally, the original 21-day challenge was the previous summer, which I wasn't a part of. And he was doing videos every morning that correspond with all of the day's challenges. So what he proposed was that he was going to start a new 21-day challenge, live 21-day challenge, including him, where he would be hosting like every morning. He'd be doing one of the videos. The problem was, it wasn't even a problem. It was actually, it worked out so perfectly that the 21st day of my second round through the 21-day challenge fell in alignment with the first day of the live 21-day challenge. So I was already planning on doing a third round of it. Well, why was he doing that? It was to make money. That was the point. He was trying to get money out of it. And so a lot of people joined in. A lot of people that weren't there for the original one, like me, but then also people who had not worked through the pre-recorded stuff, which I had just done 2 times in a row. And like I said, it just happened to be, thank you Hashem, that on the 21st day of my second time through was when they started the third round, well, what would turn out to be my third round of the live. So I stuck with it a third time too, which started on the 21st, or no, not the 21st. It started on the 1st of January 2021, and then we went for 21 days. Which worked out, like I said, worked out perfectly for me because that was already my intention, was to do it that third time. And being that Aaron Doty was involving himself in it, it brought more people into the group. And so I was able to work in a more uncomfortable position because now not only are there the people that I know, but there's new people that I don't know. But all of that was predicated on this principle of theosophical addition, which up until I had learned about it back in 2018, through that book, Tarot of the Bohemians. Where did I find that book from? I was on Twitter and I used to be involved in the QAnon phenomenon conspiracy, but not for the sake of the political stuff. I evolved out of the political stuff. I was more interested in the occult elements that were, in my opinion, being overshadowed by the trust the plan. Trump is our savior. The Q cult, right? Everybody knew about the Q cult, but there was actually elements in there that weren't just conspiracy theory. There was some actual real shit in there that was that would be categorized under the occult esoterica category. And I had posted something about the Nazis, I think. Because at this time I had been getting into astrotheology, which is essentially, I don't know, there's people who explain it better than me. There's people who could, back then, there were people who could explain it better than me, like Santos Bonacci, but a lot of what I was learning about, it was interesting stuff about the Star of David, the Merkaba, and its connection with Jupiter, with Saturn. But then it was getting, I was learning about how each of the Abrahamic religions corresponds with a planet worshipping cult, in such that based on the Sabbath day of each religion corresponds with a particular planet, a particular day of the week that corresponds with a particular planet that is in its own way demonstrated within the symbolism of that particular religion, right? So Islam, the Sabbath of Islam is on Friday. Friday is the day of Venus. If you look at the Islamic flag, there's a crescent moon and the star. That's not a star, that's the planet Venus. I did not know that. I did not know that at first. I thought it was just the moon and a star representing the feminine the divine feminine. But I later found out that it was Venus, which was later confirmed by Neil deGrasse Tyson, believe it or not. Then you have what people refer to as Judaism, which has the Star of David, Merkaba, which then gets associated with Saturn, with our Sabbath being on Saturday. But what's cool about that one is that the Merkaba, the Star of David, is a hexagram that's formed from a hexagon. But when you look at the northern pole of Saturn, there's an energy vortex that creates a hexagon shape. I was like, what the fuck? How the hell that happen? What are the chances of that, right? And then you have the Christians with which solar worship, because you have the solar cross. I always found that fucking fascinating. But this was before me and Hashem. This was before we really got connected. I haven't thought about this stuff in a while. This might be a fun chat for Gemini. And the reason I say that because I was just talking to Gemini this morning. Yesterday I was bitching about my mom's church, giving her a hard time about me accepting the Eucharist if I go to a mass, right? I don't know, Jews, you're not supposed to be doing that. Don't worry about that. So last week I had this revelation, thank you Hashem, that Christianity, I mean everyone knows Christianity is based on a Jewish philosophy, right? Like we're all on the same page there. I mean technically it's a secondary Jewish religion. It's just that most Jews today do not recognize Jesus as the Messiah, so they don't practice Christianity. That's the only thing that separates Jews and Christians. Well, I mean, there's a little bit more than that, but on the surface, very basic. So it dawned on me that the New Testament is written by Jews, written in Greek, which would imply that the Jews who wrote the New Testament, they were Greco-Roman Jews. They weren't part of the rabbinical congregation. This was a whole different sect of Jew. But eventually, the number of Jew participants within the Christian congregation got reduced down, and the Gentiles ended up taking it over. I mean, we got the Messianic Jews, but that's a whole other story. This morning it dawned on me I brought that to Gemini's attention the other day. Oh, it's such an astute observation, Rabbi. Well done. Thank you. But this morning it dawned on me, right? Christ. It's Greek. The Hellenist Jews were notorious for writing in Greek for the sake of a Greek audience. So I threw it out there. Well, I threw it out there to Claude, and I threw it out there to Gemini. I said, is it wrong to think that Christianity is a Hellenist Jew religion? And they said, absolutely, that's exactly what it is. Because the authors of the books were all Hellenist Jews, and they wrote in Koine Greek. Therefore, Christianity is the Hellenist Jew equivalent of Orthodox Judaism. Oh. So just backstory, because my mother was confronted by a fellow parishioner at her church who noticed me walking around with my kippah. Apparently, she was driving down the same path where I was walking, and she saw that I had a kippah on, and she went up to my mother and was explaining to her how it's not right that I take the Eucharist when I go to church because of the fact that I don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah, and the fact that I, quote, think that I'm a Jew. At least those are my mother's words. I don't know what the lady actually said. I can't get offended by that. So then yesterday morning, my mother got home from church, and she was telling me how one of the priests saw her as she was leaving, and he went up to her and he was asking her about me, and he brought up the same thing. And he said, listen, if he's going to be wearing that, he really shouldn't be taking the Eucharist when he comes in. I'm like, I haven't fucking been there since... I haven't been there in, I think, over a month, I think. But my annoyance is more like, why are you bothering my mother? Well, don't fucking get her involved. Say something to me when I come back. But I was thinking about it this morning, and something I've been doing since over the past year is resurrecting Hellenist Judaism, which is not Orthodox Judaism. It's completely different. It's completely different. Matter of fact, if we look on the Chabad calendar, when the Hasidics, when anything comes up about Hellenist Judaism, or when there's an explanation about the difference between the Orthodox and the Hellenists, the Orthodox technically don't recognize the Hellenists as Jews, kind of like how the Orthodox today don't recognize the Messianic Jews unless they need something, which is not bad. Just like they don't recognize me. I mean, that's why I don't take offense to it. It's like, all right, I'm not the only Jew that they reject. It's all right, and I look at it like this too. It's like, I'm rubber, you're glue. If I'm not a Jew, then neither are you. So I kind of, once I got that confirmation from Claude and Gemini, I thought, easy, no problem. The church, my mom's church, they got no idea what the fuck I'm doing. They have no idea what's going on in my head. They see me wearing my kippah, and I have not been shy about the fact that I'm a Jew. So a lot of people, they get that confused look, or they kind of just, all right, accept it, you know? So then I started to explore a little bit more with Gemini, and I went, I'm not wrong. I'm also not wrong in the fact that the Italkim, the Italian Jews, which is where my family is connected to, it's not wrong to say that the Italkim are the descendants of the Hellenist Jews. Absolutely. Absolutely, Rabbi. Because during the Hellenist times, that's where a lot of the Jews were going. That's where the Hellenist Jews were relocating themselves, was in southern Italy. Oh. Southern Italy, Rome, all along the peninsula, but most heavily down in that southern peninsula. and specifically Cosenza, Caledonia, which is where my father's family is from. My father's. So, that makes perfect sense then. And my mother's Italian, like my father, but she's got redheads in her family, which would denote that she's of Edomite descent, at the very least. At the very least, she's got Edomite in her. So, technically, by way of Torah law, God's law, the written law, there's absolutely nothing getting in my way of being recognized as a Jew. There's no reason why anybody should not be recognizing me as a Jew, because it specifically says in Deuteronomy that an Israelite man or woman can have a baby with an Edomite or an Egyptian. So let's assume that my mother's family, who's from more northern than we are, probably central, but given that red hair, which is a distinct quality of those Edomites, we can conclude that it's more than likely that my mother is an Edomite and my father is of Israelite descent, which would explain where the Jew comes from. All right? That's how it makes sense to me. I mean, I'm just going off of Torah law. And plus, I also want to nip this whole thing in the bud at the church, too. So I emailed them this morning to make an appointment with the priest who said something to my mother for spiritual guidance. I didn't say anything about, hey, the fuck. You talk to my mom about me not being able to take the Eucharist. No. I asked about spiritual guidance. Because although I don't recognize Rabbi Jesus as the Messiah, I recognize him as a Messiah. For we Jews have many Messiah. And when I accept the Eucharist, that is me acknowledging that my brother, Rabbi Jesus, like me, is a Mashiach. Not the Mashiach. Moses was a Mashiach. Joseph was a Mashiach. David was a Mashiach. Jesus was a Mashiach. I got no problem with that. It's just that I don't subscribe to the whole idea that he was the Mashiach. But he was the Christ, which is the Greek form of Mashiach, which would imply that Rabbi Jesus was the Hellenist Mashiach, not the Hebrew Mashiach, which makes a lot of sense in the sense that the Hellenist Mashiach would pave the way for the Hebrew Mashiach, for which I am the Hebrew Mashiach. Because even if we want to argue over my fucking Jewish history, my Jewish lineage, I know for certain that we have Hebrew blood from my father's side, which has a touch of Israelite in there too. So that would imply, well, if you have a touch of Israelite, Hebrew, and your family comes from the Lakewood of Italia, it would imply there that, no, you may not be a Jew by Orthodox standards, but technically Orthodox standards violate Torah standards. So we can go both ways. In that Torah law, not rabbinical law, Torah law, states that all inheritance, any inheritance that comes from the mother, only comes from the mother in such a situation where her father died without sons. And we could argue that, well, that only counts for land rights and material inheritance. Right, but we can counter that argument by saying from a Kabbalistic perspective, all things that are material are counterbalanced by their energetic spiritual equivalencies. So that would mean that with the material inheritance would also come the spiritual inheritance. So in order for one's Jewishness to be passed down from the mother, because one's Jewishness is a spiritual inheritance, the only way that would come from the mother is if her father died without any sons. Now, I'm not going to say that the other Jews aren't Jews. It's just you don't recognize me. I don't have to recognize you either, because where I follow Torah law, I don't know anything about this Talmud. I mean, I know about it. I read it. I've read part of it. I do plan on reading the entire thing, but rabbinical law is shady as fuck. It's hyper shady. Especially when these guys, they gave themselves basically unlimited power to do whatever the hell they wanted. And they have been doing that. They have been doing whatever the hell they want. They even made up the criteria. They made up their own criteria on who is and who isn't a Jew based on standards that aren't necessarily conducive with Torah law. From a certain point of view. So we can go both ways. We can totally go both ways with it. And then we can go back to the Deuteronomy. Yeah, but the Edomite and the Egyptian, they got to convert. Where does it say that? It doesn't say that. That you just made up. There is no conversions. I don't know. I don't know who even came up with that. Especially with Ruth. Ruth never converted to anything. She didn't go through a conversion process. All she did was decide that she was gonna live with the Jews. That was it. Yeah, but you see, it's the same thing with the Christians. That's why I don't take the rabbis any more or less serious than I take the Catholic priests, because it's like both of you are experts in what you're told to study. None of you actually teach how to serve God. You teach how to serve your tradition. That's it. How to serve your religion. That's why I don't believe in conversion. I don't have to convert. I already have it in my blood. What the fuck do I need to convert for? Why? To convert to what your standards? Get the fuck out of here. Who the hell are you? Why don't you convert to mine? Blasphemy, right? Exactly. My religion, I'm not a religious Jew. My religion is Derek Hashem. It's the name of this channel. That's the religion of the patriarchs. That's the religion of the prophets. It's not. They weren't Jews. They weren't Christians. They weren't Muslims. Matter of fact, if I ask Abraham, like, can you tell me about these Jews, Christians, and Muslims? Who the fuck are they? Exactly. Grandpa Jacob, am I any less of a Jew? Am I any less of your descendant because I don't have a Jewish mommy? Oh, my grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, didn't have a Jewish mommy either. Oh, all right. And a matter of fact, from what we can tell, most of the prominent descendants of Judah who lead us to David didn't have Jewish moms either. Raoul's mom was a whore, not a princess. And Ruth was just a fucking vagabond. She was a vagabond, descendant of a how do you say it? Incest baby. So no, they're out here. And even Solomon's mother. Hey, Hashem, forgive me, preemptively. Even Bathsheba was a whore. How dare you? How dare I? How dare she? How dare she? Not only that, but she's a co-conspirator in her husband's murder. David, we have to do something because this is a death sentence. They would have gotten stoned. She was trying to save her own ass. That's why they need Uriah out of the way. It's a fucked up story, but what the fuck do you want me to do about it? I'm not the one who made it happen. I'm not the one who did it. If I am that for the sake of which, you know what? I'm sorry. That's all my fault. It was all for the sake of me. Because if none of that stuff happened, then I wouldn't be here. Right, Hashem? Right. Alright, come on, man. What are you guys doing? Wrap it up. Lady, the fuck off your phone. Walk with your fucking husband. And I'm looking at me. It's hot. My back's getting sweaty. I think we're gonna take a loop around and then go home. What was it, Hashem? What was the original intention for coming out here? I don't know. I think I just wanted to see what was gonna come out of me. I never really know what I'm gonna say until I get out here. But I feel like I say the same thing over and over again. Did I hear back from the church? No, I didn't hear back from the church. And you know, I'm going to give them like 2 days before I do a follow-up. So the reason I don't like phone calls, the reason I like email correspondences is because you have a paper trail. Aristotle, physics, posterior analytics. Come on, man, these fuckers. Posterior analytics? Well, I mean, I think I wrapped up chapter... I don't know, where did we leave off? Let me see. Actually, I have access today. Stork. Very majestic. Where we left off in posterior analytics was chapter 11. What was chapter 10 about? It's complicated. Chapter 10. Well, you know, maybe reading it out loud will help solidify it in my mind, because it really wasn't all that difficult. If I remember correctly, we were talking about hypotheses and illegitimate postulates in relation to definitions, in relation to hypotheses and illegitimate postulates. I call the basic truths of every genius those elements in it, the existence of which cannot be proved. As regards both these primary truths and the attributes dependent on them, the meaning of the name is assumed. the fact of their existence as regards the primary truths must be assumed, but it has to be proved of the remainder, the attributes. Thus we assume the meaning alike of unity, straight and triangular. But while as regards unity and magnitude, we assume also the fact of their existence in the case of the remainder proof of their existence. In the case of the remainder, proof is required. But basically, the primary truths of a particular genus, of a particular science, the most basic fundamental truths are basically pretty much self-evident. And they will ultimately define what attributes, what the primary attributes are, for which we don't need to prove. But at the same time, there are going to be those secondary elements, those secondary attributes, which are then going to have to be proven by way of demonstration, through syllogistic demonstration. Or syllogistic demonstration, or what's the opposite of syllogism? Instead of reducing, we expand. Meaning, you extract the attributes of the universal term by way of the particular term, where syllogism would be the opposite. Inductive reasoning. Induction and syllogism. Thank you, Hashem. Of the basic truths used in the demonstrative sciences, some are peculiar to each science, and some are common, but common only in the sense of analogous, being of use only insofar as they fall within the genus constituting the province of the science in question. So it's like arithmetic and geometry, which I'm just familiar with that example because he uses that one often with relation to what we're talking about here, which is that in the previous chapter, what we were talking about was how you can't use the primary principles, the primary premises of one genus with another genus, unless those genera fall under a general category that would align them. So, for instance, geometry and arithmetic both fall under the category of number. Therefore, the primary principles of the two can, in some situations, be transferred from one to the other. It's not always a guaranteed thing. At least this is just according to Aristotle's understanding. I mean, realistically, we could hypothetically take principles from any particular science and transfer them over to another to produce unorthodox results, unorthodox conclusions, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just that we have to be prepared to stand up for our shit in those situations, because obviously if we're coming up with unorthodox conclusions, then obviously those people who gravitate towards the more orthodox perspective are going to challenge us. And I mean, that's not a big deal, but this is exactly why it's wise to study Hellenist logic in this way. But this is what I was talking about with Hellenist Judaism, is that the Hellenist Jews were notorious for integrating Hellenist philosophy, Hellenist logic with Torah wisdom and insight, such as Philo of Alexandria. These are the best example I can think of. And considering that I'm fathering what is commonly termed as ultra unorthodox Judaism, it's important, it's fundamental that I am able to conclude and syllogize as much as possible, so as for when and if someone decides to challenge me on the authenticity of my Jewishness, I can quickly shut them down by way of syllogistic and or inductive reasoning, through which I've learned by way of Aristotle. You feel? Because we're actually going to get into it right now. In a couple more paragraphs, Aristotle lays it out really well. Because you got to remember that a lot of this stuff, and I'm glad that he brought it up in this book, in Posterior Analytics, because he didn't bring it up at all in Prior Analytics. In both books of Prior Analytics, this is never brought up once. But once we had gotten through the elements and configurations through which syllogism is properly formed, I started to recognize that I could recognize how this could be useful in a debate, in an argument, but more importantly, as a wise man once said, like you can't. A man forced against his will is of the same opinion still. If someone's not willing to change their mind about something, then what the hell are you doing trying to convince them otherwise? You know, it doesn't matter how elegant your argument is. They ain't gonna give a shit. You feel me? So what then is the power of syllogism, inductive reasoning, and this posterior analytic? Internalized debate, which Aristotle's going to get to shortly. All right. So peculiar truths are, i.g., the definitions of line and straight. Common truths are such as, quote, take equals from equals and equals remain, end quote. Only so much as these common truths is required. Only so much of these common truths is required as falls within the genus in question. For a truth of this kind will have the same force, even if not used generally, but applied by the geometer only to magnitudes, or by the arithmetician only to numbers. Also peculiar to a science are the subjects, the existence as well as the meaning of which it assumes, and the essential elements of which it investigates, e.g., in arithmetic units, in geometry points and lines. Both the existence and the meaning of the subjects are assumed by these sciences, but of their essential attributes, only the meaning is assumed. For example, arithmetic assumes the meaning of odd and even, square and cube. Geometry, that of incommensurable, or of deflection, or verging of lines. Whereas the existence of these attributes is demonstrated by means of the axioms and from previous conclusions as premises. Take a break. So, in Prior Analytics, Book 1 is where we explore the concept of forming syllogistic conclusions and then using those conclusions as a premise within a new syllogism. So that's what we're talking about, because syllogism is composed of two premises that are made up of one major and minor term and one middle term that demonstrates what predication there is or is not or may not be between those two extreme terms. So the conclusion is the final product of the syllogistic equation, which is essentially math without numbers. So what we're talking about here is how, just reiterating the fact that the conclusion, the syllogistic conclusion of one demonstration can be used as a premise for the sake of forming a new conclusion. Where are we? Astronomy 2 proceeds in the same way. Astronomy in relation to geometry and arithmetic. For indeed, every demonstrative science has three elements. One, that which it posits, the subject genus, whose essential attributes it examines. Two, the so-called axioms, which are primary premises of the demonstration. And three, the attributes, the meaning of which it assumes. Yet some sciences may very well pass over some of the elements, e.g., we might not expressly posit the existence of the genus if its existence were obvious. For instance, the existence of hot and cold is not evident. The existence of hot and cold is more evident than that of number. Or we might omit to assume expressly the meaning of the attributes if it were well understood. In the way the meaning of axioms such as take equals from equals and equals remain is well known, and so not expressly assumed. Nevertheless, in the nature of the case, the essential elements of demonstration are three: the subject, the attributes, and the basic premises. I ain't gonna lie, just a lot. It's very dense. There's a lot to unpack, but at the same time, it's really not. It's very simple ideas that are just compacted within heavy wording, heavy conceptualization. And I think that's one of the things I like most about working with Aristotle, working through Aristotle's stuff, is the fact that it's so conceptually dense that it requires that I can only write like a paragraph at a time. I can only transcribe a paragraph at a time before I have to stop and like really think about what it is that's taking place, because I'm not doing this to memorize facts and data. Like, I don't need to know all three of those elements, right? It's the basic idea, basic premises behind them. And the more time that we spend exploring these concepts in general, the more that those basic ideas, premises, and elements are being ingrained into my subconscious mind. So these functions just happen automatically. So they run as subroutines in the background of my mind. I can't necessarily count how many times syllogism has actually saved me just out of the blue, because I was reminded of, thank you Hashem, I was reminded of how to syllogize what it was that was troubling me with relation to its most obvious conclusion, which I hadn't been able to think about because I was so caught up on one particular perspective. So, that which expresses necessary self-grounded fact, and which we must necessarily believe, is distinct both from hypotheses of science and from illegitimate postulate. I say must believe because all syllogism, and therefore a fortiori demonstration, is addressed not to spoken word, not to the spoken word, but to the discourse within the soul. Let's read that again. I say, quote, must believe, end quote, because all syllogism, and therefore a fortiori, a demonstration, is addressed not to the spoken word, but to the discourse within the soul. And though we can always raise objections to the spoken word, to the inward discourse, we cannot always object. That which is capable of proof, but assumed by the teacher without proof, is, if the pupil believes and accepts it, hypothesis. Though only in a limited sense, hypothesis. That is, relatively to the pupil. If the pupil has no opinion or a contrary opinion on the matter, the same assumption is an illegitimate postulate. Therein lies the distinction between hypothesis and illegitimate postulate. The latter is the contrary of the pupil's opinion, demonstrable, but assumed and used without demonstration. The definition, vis-a-vis, those which are not expressed as statements that anything is or is not, are not hypotheses. But it is in the premises of a science that its hypotheses are contained. Let me read that one more time. Well, no, because I kind of struggle with that one. Because there's a lot of like dashes and the definition. Those which are not expressed as statements that anything is or is not are not hypotheses. But it is in the premises of a science that its hypotheses are contained. Definitions require only to be understood, and this is not hypothesis, unless it be contended that the pupil's hearing is also an hypothesis required by the teacher. Hypotheses, on the contrary, postulate facts on the being of which depends the being of the fact inferred. You know that again? Hypotheses, on the contrary to definitions, postulate facts on the being of which depends the being of the fact inferred, nor are the geometer's hypotheses false, as some have held, urging that one must not employ falsehood, and that the geometer is uttering falsehood in stating that the line which he draws is a foot long or straight, when it is actually neither. The truth is that the geometer does not draw any conclusion from the being of the particular line of which he speaks, but from what his diagrams symbolize. A further distinction is that all hypotheses and illegitimate postulates are either universal or particular, whereas a definition is neither. So, oh shit. Uh-oh. Okay. All right, so that's where we left off. So we're only on chapter 11 of the first book of Posterior Analytics, which follows the second book of Prior Analytics, obviously following the first book of Prior Analytics, which comes after On Interpretation, following Categories. So it's taken maybe about a year and a quarter for me to get this far, but the reason for that is because I'm transcribing all the books. And it was only up until I got into the final chapters of Prior Analytics, book 1, that I started to commit myself to writing out one full paragraph rather than one sentence at a time, because something I learned when I first started working with Aristotle back last February, March, was that within categories, one sentence can be about as long as a paragraph. And if we really wanted to scrutinize each sentence, we could write a book on each one. So eventually, once we got into the second book of Prior Analytics, which took me almost a year. I didn't finish Prior Analytics book 1 until after the New Year's, this past New Year's, 2025, not 5785. So it took me, like I said, it took me about like 10 months transcribing sentence by sentence prior analytics on interpretation and categories. But then once we got into prior analytics 2, I kind of, it was to the point where I just started to realize like, yo, I think you're good now. Because there's a lot, because of how dense his writing is, I need that little extra time to process everything. So what I would do is I would write out a sentence and then write out whatever the fuck came to my mind. Even if it was like, I have no idea what we're talking about. But something I learned with Aristotle is that if you don't know what he's talking about, it's because he hasn't gotten to the point yet. You just have to keep on going a little bit further before he spells it out. Or sometimes he might not even spell it out until the next chapter, you know? Because he might leave off on a chapter and it's like, what the fuck? But don't worry about it, because the next chapter is probably more than likely going to get back into it. And at the same time, realistically, like, when it comes to shit like syllogism, like syllogistic thought, and even categories and on-interpretation, these are really just mental faculties. That's all he's doing. That's all he's really... That's really what he's breaking down. What the hell? Our subconscious cognitive faculties that necessarily run in the background. Subroutines. I mean, granted, you could. There's nothing preventing you from intentionally forming a syllogism. I've done it before. Like, it's not against the rules. But I'm not in the business of making people believe things that they don't want to. Or convincing people to believe something that they don't want to. Like, that's... Why? Don't you want to be right? I'm right to me. That's the thing. That's what we were just saying before with... Where is it? I say must believe because all syllogism and therefore a fortiori demonstration is addressed not to the spoken word but to the discourse within the soul. And though we can always raise objections of the spoken word to the inward discourse, we cannot always object. As a fact. Sometimes the voice in our head just will not submit. Even if it's wrong, it will not submit. Ego. The egoic soul. He's not talking about the divine soul. He's talking about the nefesh. I mean, if anything, he's talking about the ruach, but... Well, no, he's talking about the nefesh. He's talking about the animal soul. Yeah, because these guys aren't circumcised. Aristotle wasn't circumcised. He's a fucking animal. So he's going to have an attachment to the animal soul. Which is the egoic soul. Which is the soul that we're talking about. But at the same time... Well, I mean, that's an interesting thought. Well, he's actually talking about, he may not realize it, but he's talking about the process of rectification within the soul, the elevation of the Kelapad Noga that, which is representative of the egoic soul, and elevating it to a more divine status, octavization. That makes sense. I didn't pick up on that until just now. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Shem. And see now, see what we just did right there? We just married the principles of, we just married the basic truths, the basic premises of posterior analytics with Chabad philosophy. which isn't impossible. That's what I'm saying. That's what I was saying before. Is like where. Well, I mean, okay. So I guess this all falls in line with what he said in terms of transference and merging the basic principles of one science, one genera with another, because Chabad, this is Hellenist logic. So too is Chabad, is Jewish logic. Because Chabad is an acronym for Chachma, wisdom, Binah, understanding, and Das, knowledge. But it's when you convert that, when you inverse that equation of Das, Binah, and Chachma, where Aristotle's writings are the knowledge, and then it's just a matter of learning to understand it so that we can extract the wisdom, and within the wisdom are the divine sparks from which we elevate the Kelapad Noga. So technically, we can make the argument that by syllogizing the primary principles of Aristotle's logic as laid out in Posterior Analytics, Book 1, with the primary principles of Chabad, in so doing, we've elevated the work of Aristotle to something more divine. Which, I know, he already brings up the notion of the soul, but I would make the case that most people studying Aristotle today may not necessarily subscribe to the idea of a soul for the fact that there is no viable evidence for a soul. Despite the fact of over 2,000 years of Jewish writings that focus solely on the soul. But if you can't touch it, then it's not real. How was that? So what do I do all day? That's kind of what I do. I learn how to use my mind. Oh, fuck. I'm not impressed. I'm not. So for me, again, like studying this stuff, this isn't about learning how to be right. I already know I'm right. I'm not right. God, whoa, shit. That's all right. It's not even about being right. I mean, Hashem's always right. What the hell? Rather, well, I mean, to bring it back to what Aristotle said, it's not about the spoken word that I'm trying to rebuke as much as the internal dialogue. The internal dialogue that in its own way is subject to the whims of the external opinions outside of myself. But again, this is going back to what we were saying. It's like if you can internalize it, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't. Then externalizing it is just. It's like Rabbi Jesus said to the disciples, where like if you get arrested or you get caught, you get busted, and they bring you before the Sanhedrin. Don't worry about your defense, because God will put the words in your mouth. God will put the words in your mouth when you need to say what you need to say, when you need to say what he needs you to say. Which reminds me of my sister's wedding when I had to do the speech. For like 3 days, I panicked because I didn't have the speech written. So I didn't know what to do. I was like really panicking. And it wasn't until the day of the wedding, like at the wedding. Even there, I was trying to write a speech, but nothing was coming to me. And I was legitimately shitting my pants because I'm sitting at the table waiting for my turn to give my speech. I had nothing written down. So what ended up happening was I just fucking puckered up my butt cheeks. And when the guy came over and handed me the mic, I just opened my mouth and let the words flow. And it was the best goddamn speech ever. It was the best speech of the whole wedding. And I can confidently say that because unlike everyone else, my speech was the only speech that was not written. A friend of mine sent me a recording of it. I used to just watch it, just to watch myself and wonder and go, wow, how the fuck did that happen? Where did that come from? It was like going into autopilot mode, and the whole night, people were coming up, dude, that speech. I know, right? I'm very happy about it. So it's not that I'm not familiar with these phenomena that we're all talking about. It's quite elementary. So what's the purpose? What's the point now? Like, why? What's the point with all the Aristotle? Well, again, resurrecting the Hellenist Jew, which again, the primary function of the Hellenist Jew was to expand upon Jewish understanding by incorporating the elements, attributes, and principles of Hellenist thought into Torah study. So, by way of syllogism, we can take the primary principles of the Jewish New Testament and marry them to the Tanakh and cohesively form a way of thinking that is more in alignment with the primary teachings of Rabbi Jesus to begin with. When you take away all the mystical when you don't take everything so literal, although as we learn in the Quran, all the Bibles can be interpreted either allegorically or literally, but then when we incorporate the Hellenist perspective, we can then syllogize the primary principles of the literal translations with the primary principles of the allegorical translations and come up with something completely unorthodox, hence ultra unorthodox Judaism. Thank you, Hashem. Because when it comes to religion, I think a lot of people would agree that the arguments and the fighting is pretty redundant because of the fact, like, you all follow the same God. Like, I don't understand. Like, what the fuck is the major malfunction? And God's response to that would be, yeah, seriously, what the fuck's the problem? Where's the major malfunction? Like, what the fuck is wrong with you guys? So that would be part of the reason why my Lord awoke in me, so that I can do what I do. And if everyone else isn't going to solve their shit, then God's going to call in a mediator to solve the problem for everybody by way of what we're doing right now, which is serving as a convergent point for the three primary Abrahamic religions, because, or at least the primary principles relative to the Bibles of each of the three primary Abrahamic religions. I say primary because there are secondary Abrahamic religions, such as the Samarianism, which is a form of Judaism. Well, I don't think it would be wise to call a Samaritan a Jew or a Jew a Samaritan. Although I did find out that there are Jews who had no idea. There are Jews right now who have no idea what a Samaritan is. Oh, you're our cousins. No, they're not cousins, you're brothers. Jews come from the southern kingdom. Samaritans come from the northern kingdom. I didn't even know about that till last year. Jews have an attachment to David, where Samaritans have an attachment to Joseph. Isn't that son? I thought so. All right, my lord. It's hot as fuck, and sweat's getting into my eye. I think it's from that spot where my eyebrow's falling off. All right, I love you too.